Insurance isn't one size fits all, and shopping for it shouldn't feel like squeezing into something that just doesn't fit. That's why drivers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they show you options that fit your budget. Enough hunting for discounts, trying to calculate rates, and tinkering with coverages. Maybe you're picking out your very first policy, or maybe you're just looking for something that works better for you and your family. Either way, they make it simple to see your options. No guesswork, no surprises. Ready to see how easy and fun shopping for car insurance can be? Visit Progressive.com and give the Name Your Price tool a try. Take the stress out of shopping and find coverage that fits your life, on your terms. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Hi, Nat Doig here. Just a heads up that today's episode does contain some strong language. Welcome to Weird in the Wade, a podcast about all that's weird, wonderful, and a little off kilter in the town of Biggleswade in Bedfordshire and its surrounding area. If you like your history with a pinch of the paranormal and your supernatural stories with some historical context, then this is the podcast for you. Whether it's haunted pubs or the mystery of Tempsford. Grab a cuppa, sit back, and let me take you on a journey into the weird. It's June 1847, Tempsford, a small village which is split in two by the Great North Road, just north of Biggleswade and Sandy. 25-year-old Sarah Baker, lady's maid to Mrs Anne Lucinda Elliott, is new to Tempsford Hall. As she walks into the servants' hall for dinner on her first day of work, she senses that unmistakable lull in conversation, that pregnant pause which indicates that either she was the subject of their talk or that the conversation was something that her fellow servants do not want her to hear. Sarah smiles stiffly and glances around. The room is not as large as some servants' halls that she has been in, but the number of servants here is not particularly great either. The housekeeper stands in greeting. I think you've met most of the staff already, haven't you? Apart from... The housekeeper scans the room. Louisa Sims here, one of our kitchen maids. I think you missed her. Louisa is a thin-faced girl with sparkling blue eyes, but something about her looks. Sarah can only think of one word to describe it. Something about Louisa Sims looks haunted.
How do you do?
Louisa says primly.
Very well, thank you, Louisa.
Sarah replies warmly. She wants her time at Tempsford Hall to be as smooth as possible. This is a real chance for her to stay with the family in a good position. And, the housekeeper breaks into Sarah's thoughts, I think you missed William Maythorne here, the footman, and Mr Tompkins, the groom. Sarah smiles at both men. The footman, being the younger, is tall and capable looking, whilst the groom is older, a married man, she believes, with a family who live at the hall when the Elliott family are elsewhere, which, she understands, to be quite often. Sarah knows something unusual happened at Tempsford Hall on the Elliott's last stay. That is why she was recruited to be the new lady's maid. Mrs Elliott's previous maid, Esther Turner, left suddenly and unexpectedly. Mrs Elliott was candid that there were some annoyances about the house which had upset Esther, but Sarah is not entirely sure what these annoyances were. When she broached the subject with the housekeeper, Mrs Warren, she just chuckled darkly and said, Don't you worry, it's not that kind of annoyance, the kind that costs a girl her reputation. Nothing like that. Just some old noises about the house. The mistress is a very sensitive lady, and a young one too. And so Sarah settles at the servants' table, where that conversation which hushed on her arrival still buzzes at the back of her mind, prickles at her neck. What are they hiding? Probably just gossip. New staff always generate gossip and speculation, but Sarah has been in service for over a decade now, and she knows that this feels different. Sarah's first few days at the hall go by with little difficulty. Her mistress is a quiet, bookish young woman with a newborn daughter, Harriet. Mrs Elliott is not going out nor receiving visitors other than close family at this time, so Sarah's work is less demanding than she is used to. One unusual aspect of the house, though, is that the best bedrooms on the first floor are given over to being empty, or for the few guests, whilst the usual guest bedrooms are occupied by the family and some of the servants, Sarah included. Mrs Elliott's room is now next to the nursery and opposite her dressing room. Sarah's own room is next to her mistress's on the other side. The housekeeper merely says that this move was made so that they could all have more restful sleep, though Sarah does not understand how that can be, with her mistress now so close to the nursery. Sarah's own room is large, with good plain furniture in it, including a sturdy table and writing desk, and a dark wood wardrobe. One afternoon, whilst her mistress is resting, Sarah is in her room mending items of clothing, when she hears a most singular and peculiar sound. It is a loud ticking, but not of a stately clock like a grandfather or grandmother clock. It is fast ticking, like that of a watch, except the ticking is so loud, louder than any watch or clock ticking that she has ever heard. Sarah puts down her sewing and moves as silently as she can about the room, listening to where this ticking is coming from, but she cannot find the source. At one moment it comes from her right, and the next it's straight ahead, and then the next it's from her left. Then, when she finally thinks she has pinpointed the source, there is nothing there. Most perplexing is that the sound then drifts, getting quieter and further away until it is gone. The very same day, but sometime after she heard the ticking, there comes a loud knock on Sarah's door. She gets up to answer it, only to find that there is no one there. She marches down to the servants' hall, where she finds Louisa, the kitchen maid, laying the table, and the housekeeper looking over some books.
Someone has just banged most violently on my door. And, well, they ran off because when I opened it, there was nobody there.
Louisa drops a knife, which clatters on the stone floor. She ducks down to pick it up so that Sarah cannot see her face. The housekeeper looks up from her books. She takes off her reading glasses and motions for Sarah to sit down. "Is that the only unexplained sound that you've heard?" she asks. Sarah, annoyed now and convinced that one of the other servants has played a trick on her, sits but says in a voice a little too snappy, so that she instantly regrets it.
I have come across town ruffians and urchins playing knock-run ginger, but never grown servants in a house. It's ridiculous.
She expects a reprimand from the housekeeper about her tone of voice, but instead the older woman rubs her forehead and says, "I mentioned to you that annoyance is here at the hall, did I not? You know, that is why Esther, the former lady's maid, left, yes?"
Yes.
"Well, this is something that we must all live with here at the hall. Now, you didn't answer my question. Is that the only unaccounted for sound that you have heard?"
No, it is not. Earlier I thought I heard the loudest ticking, like a watch. Fast ticking, but louder than any watch or clock makes. The sound moved about the room, so I could not pinpoint its source. I searched and could find nothing. Then it petered out as if it drifted far away from me.
Louisa snorts and mutters.
You're lucky then.
The housekeeper and Sarah ignore the kitchen maid. "Well, that is a new one, I believe. A ticking sound." The housekeeper gets up, brushing her skirts with her hand, saying, "I'll fetch Mr. Johnson. He will want to know." After the housekeeper swishes out of the servants' hall, Sarah turns to the kitchen maid and asks her,
What do you mean I'm lucky?
Louisa stands tall and explains,
Just that I have had a right old time of it here at the hall. At first I had my own room up in the attic. A nice room it was too, bigger than most. But one night I awoke to hear a gentleman coughing right next to me. Not out in the passage, nor from a room below. Not one cough neither, but many coughs and groans too. like a man in a great deal of pain, right next to my ear. I could see there was no one in my room. The candle was still alight, yet I heard them, or him, right next to me. I hid under my covers like a little child, I'm ashamed to say. I told Cook the next morning, and she said I was dreaming, but I continued to be woken almost every night by heavy footsteps passing across my room or across the rooms below, which then weren't slept in as they are now. But the worst of it, the reason I now will not sleep alone here, is this. It was the last time the family stayed here. The whole household was being disturbed by footsteps, sounds like furniture being moved or dragged, and by voices in the night, screams, groans, even words being spoken. I awoke one night and my heart was racing. I knew I was not alone in my room, and yet I knew the door was bolted because my fellow kitchen maid Hannah had told me to bolt it when I told her of the sounds I heard at night. So I awake, heart pounding, and I can feel a cold hand, as cold as death, like bitter ice across my face. I could not breathe, I was so terrified. I looked up and I saw a figure by my bed, its arm extended. I thought it was an intruder. I yelled, "I will know who you are or I will leave this house." But the figure just slowly moved away. Then it occurred to me that this was not an intruder, not least because my door was bolted, but because this was a dark night, no moon, no light left burning in room, and yet I could see this figure clearly as he moved away from me. He was no longer a shadow but lit by some unseen light. He was bright and illuminated, then he glided towards the window and disappeared, as did the light. I should have left that night, but instead I spoke with my master, and he said that I should not sleep alone anymore. I was moved to a different room, where I have a companion, Hannah, now with me every night, and we bolt the door fast. So just hearing a knock and some ticking is very lucky indeed. I hope you never experience anything like I have.
Sarah is silent. The kitchen maid must be no more than 17, she thinks, and this could have happened to her last year when she was but 16. Over the next few weeks and months, Sarah hears more tales from the servants and from her mistress, Mrs Elliott, who on more than one occasion steps into Sarah's room at night, believing that Sarah is moving about. On waking Sarah from her sleep, Mrs Elliott implores her to sleep in her room with her, and so whenever Mr Elliott is in Bedford, which is quite frequently, Sarah and her mistress share a bedroom. On one such night, both women hear distinct screams coming from the rooms below, or so they think. Mrs Elliott and Sarah stand on the landing listening, straining their ears in the dark silence that now surrounds them. No one else that night hears the screams. Mrs Elliott is keeping a record of the noises and the times they occur to compare with guests in the house and sometimes the servants. But some of the sounds occur when the Elliots are both away. One common noise that both Sarah and William Johnson, the butler, hear is the Elliots' carriage returning after a night out. The butler prepares to greet his master and mistress on hearing the sound, and Sarah looks out from her window to see the family return, only to see nothing. There is no carriage. The family don't return until hours later. On another occasion, Sarah is writing in her room when she hears the most peculiar of sounds, like a heavy wagon going over the drive and causing quite the disturbance. She looks out of the window and there is no one and nothing outside, certainly no wagon. She hurries down the stairs to ask the butler if he heard this wagon, if he knows what it might be, but he has heard nothing this time.
But it made the house shake,
Sarah explains. But the butler was at the back of the house, away from the drive, and Sarah is just left confused. One last extraordinary thing happens to Sarah amongst what she now thinks of as mundane occurrences. The footsteps, the swishing of skirts, the groans and screams in the night, the carriage reels on gravel when there's no carriage in sight. This one last incredible thing happens when she is in her room reading. It is a peaceful afternoon. They have not been disturbed for some days, and the house is like that. There will be weeks of peace, of tranquillity. They will all begin to convince themselves that it's all over. And some, Sarah knows, those who only experience a few annoying sounds, will tell themselves it was all in their imagination. Then out of the blue, the disturbances strike up again, just like on this afternoon. Sarah is reading, snatching a few minutes of time to herself whilst her mistress is out. The birds are singing outside and no other noise disturbs her until there is the loudest bang on the table right next to her. Sarah leaps out of her skin, in shock, or so it feels like to her. She checks the table. There is no damage. Nothing is out of place. She checks the floor, the ceiling, and everything is as it should be. She clatters down those back stairs to find the butler, who she has begun to rely on when these strange occurrences happen. William follows her back to her room and inspects it, and just as she did, he finds nothing amiss. Sarah implores him to thump the table, to strike it as hard as he possibly can. He is a powerfully built man. He obliges, smashing his fist down on the table. The noise is nothing compared to what Sarah had just heard. And what Sarah experienced at Tempsford Hall is but nothing contrasted with all the unaccounted for circumstances which plague the Elliots and their servants between 1844 and 48. Welcome to Weird in the Wade. I'm Nat Doig, and today we're exploring a haunting which took place 180 years ago. It's a haunting which I believe has gone unnoticed for decades, possibly since 1850, when an account of the activity was written down. The details of the events between 1844 and 48 have lain in the Bedfordshire archives undisturbed. I discovered them by chance through a broader search for information about Tempsford. More on that in a moment. I took a punt. The online description said a Mrs Elliott of Tempsford Hall had written a statement alongside her servants of strange noises and sights they had witnessed at the hall. Now, this could have been a simple letter or something more detailed, so I requested to have a look at it. I was not disappointed. The archives gave me the original 27-page document, handwritten by a friend of Mrs Elliott in Goldington, Bedford, in 1850. I'm still unsure who wrote this down for Mrs Elliott and whether it was shared more widely at the time, but all the indications are that it was not shared. 1850 is too early for the Society of Psychical Research to be involved, and the papers of the family eventually just ended up in the archives in Bedford. I will be bringing this haunting to life for you in this episode and sharing some of Tempsford's relevant history from the time, which includes riots, poaching and more. But make sure you listen right until the end of this episode though, as there's an update about new activity from the Golden Pheasant pub and a new witness. This was information that came to me too late to include in the last episode. There's also an update on the Road Ghost episode as well. And thank you to everyone who has sent me your Road Ghost stories. I have loved reading them. Thank you. Back to Tempsford. As I briefly mentioned in the introduction, Tempsford is a hamlet just north of Sandy and Biggleswade, which is cut in two by the A1, or Great North Road as it was. On the west is Church End, where you'll find a beautiful striped church, and the earthworks of Gannock's Castle. It's one of the proposed sites of the Battle of Tempsford, where Jarl Toglos and others, including a king of the Danelaw, were killed by Anglo-Saxons in the early 10th century. We covered it in the Phantom Army episode last August. On the eastern side of the A1 is where you'll find Tempsford Hall and the remains of RAF Tempsford, including Gibraltar Farm, a top secret zone during the Second World War. And it's where the Special Operations Executive trained and flew from to be deposited behind enemy lines. It's the story of the SOE, as they were known, many of whom were women, that drew me to Tempsford. Our next episode will be about some of these remarkable women and their fight against the Nazis, as well as covering the later ghostly activity at Tempsford Hall, which has been linked to its wartime history as a hospital and airbase. But for today's episode, we are in the 1840s. Tempsford Hall was about 60 years old at this time, and it had been built by Sir Gillies Payne. It was a completely new house when he built it. But by 1844, the house was leased to Robert Elliott, a gentleman of considerable means. He owned a large house in Goldington, Bedford, and homes in Margate and Brighton. In 1844, he was 27 years old, and his wife Lucinda was just 18. They were newlyweds, and Tempsford Hall was to be their country retreat for fishing, hunting and shooting parties, and general rural living. Business interests called Robert Elliott away from home on many nights, and so his wife, Anne Lucinda, who seems to have been known by her middle name, was left to manage the household by herself. The hall was a large mansion. There is a detailed description of it when it is up for lease in 1848 and 1851, and the house is described as such. A capital mansion house and park with manor and fishery, pleasure gardens, stables, coach houses, and all other conveniences. The house contains entrance hall, drawing, dining and breakfast rooms, library, housekeeper's rooms, butler's pantry, servants' hall, kitchen, scullery and larders, 11 principal bedrooms and dressing rooms, and 10 other good bedrooms and capital cellarage. The outbuildings consist of a dairy, laundry, washhouse, bakehouse, brewhouse, icehouse, and other offices. There is an abundance of spring and soft water. Excellent stabling for 11 horses, harness room with lofts over and 2 double coach houses with sleeping room above. There's a gardener's and keeper's cottages. The manor extends over 3,000 acres of land with excellent shooting and the fishery of the rivers Ouse and Ivel. The whole of the park may be had if required. Tempsford is within easy distance of the Fitzwilliam Oakley and Cambridgeshire foxhounds. The Great North Road by Eton passes the Porter's Lodge, and it's about 6 miles north of Biggleswade. To be left in charge of such a large home, with so many servants, at just 18 must have been daunting for Lucinda. It seems that both her mother and mother-in-law were often with her at the house to begin with. The staff also seem to have been quite young. The butler, William Johnson, in 1844, is only 32 years old. We don't know the age of Sarah's first lady's maid, but her replacement, Sarah Baker, is only 25 when Lucinda is 20. In the 27-page handwritten statement, which summarises in detail the strange occurrences at the hall, Lucinda states that within 2 weeks of her arrival in late August 1844, the strange disturbances commenced. Here's a direct quote from her statement about these first occurrences within Tempsford Hall. A fortnight after our arrival at the hall, Mr Elliott and myself were sitting in the small study about 9:30 o'clock in the evening. The windows were closed and the door leading into the great hall was wide open. We were both reading when we distinctly heard footsteps coming across the hall approaching from the dining room. They stopped at the study door and then appeared to sound more distant. At the same time, we heard bolts drawn and undrawn. At first, Mr Elliott, supposing it to be the butler, wondered at his staying in the great hall instead of coming into the room, and remarked that he had not rung for him. Finding, however, that all was silent, we took the candles and examined each room. All were quiet. The windows closed and fastened for the night, and the door shut. On the servants coming in to provide tea, we asked who it was who had been moving about the hall. However, all the servants had been at supper since 9 o'clock, and no one had left the servants' hall. A few nights after this, I was awoke about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning by Mr Elliott exclaiming that thieves were breaking into the house. I begged him not to go down himself, but to ring for the butler, who that night happened to have the pistols. He did so, but on investigation being made, everything was found quite quiet, and in the same order as it was left the previous night. We also looked out of the window but could see nothing. We, at the time, slept in the back room. I had heard nothing myself being fast asleep, but Mr Elliott told me that the first noise that surprised him was the whole door violently shaken. Then the window of the dining room. Afterwards, a voice distinctly said, "That will do. It is all right." There was no further disturbance that night, and we concluded that the violent ringing of the servants' bells and of us calling for the butler had frightened the thieves away. We were very careful afterwards to have pistols in the room of a night, and also providing the butler with firearms. These initial experiences contain many phenomena which will persist throughout the 4 years the Elliots reside at Tempsford Hall. There is a peculiar aspect to the footsteps heard in Tempsford Hall and with some of the other sounds experienced, and that's this description that at one moment they can be extremely near and loud with a clear direction, but the next they can be far away or fading or coming from a place that would be impossible, as they had been so close a moment before. But before I break down the rest of the haunting phenomena and consider all of the witnesses, it's important to consider what Tempsford was like at the time, because in this initial experience, Mr. Elliott clearly believes that he has heard thieves breaking in. Now, the noises and the words spoken don't particularly evoke the sounds of a break-in, but it's the logical response, especially when you consider some of the social issues facing Tempsford in the 1840s. Tempsford in the mid-19th century. Although Tempsford was a small village or hamlet at the time, it was lively. In the decade before the Elliots moved to Tempsford Hall, 2 riots occurred. Yes, in this tiny rural scattering of cottages and farmhouses, Tempsford had made the national news because of its unruly inhabitants.
Hey, you all right? Come here and have another drink. I'll tell you. You sit down.
The first riot was more a celebration or party that got out of hand. The Bedfordshire Archives describe it as an orgy of beer drinking, swearing and bell ringing in the church. It appears that the vicar, a Reverend Otter, great name, was none too pleased, but also was forgiving of the drunks. The punishment for the revellers was for them to write a grovelling apology to the newspapers, which was printed in the Cambridge Chronicle on the 30th of March, 1832, and it reads thus. We, whose names are undersigned, hereby make a public apology to the Reverend G. Otter, curate of Tempsford, for our riotous conduct on the evening of Tuesday the 20th of March.
What shall we do with a drunken sailor? What shall we do with a drunken sailor? Let's ring the bell,
In obtaining possession of Tempsford Church, drinking beer there, refusing to leave the belfry upon his remonstrances, and using violent language to him upon the occasion.
We're having a great time. I don't want any of that. You bugger off,
We're not going anywhere. We're not going anywhere. None of us can stay right here.
No, go away. Leave us alone in here. We're staying right.
And we hereby also express our sorrow for the same, and acknowledge ourselves thankful for his having waived any further proceedings against us. Signed R. Bennett, J. Bradshaw, J. Butterworth, I. Eakins, R. Medlock, and W. Richardson. No doubt Robert Elliott would have heard of this unruly behaviour as a young man living in Bedford. The second riot, which happened later in the decade, just 6 years before the Elliots took up residence in Tempsford, was a more serious and principled, if misguided, affair. In June 1838, some of the most respected gentleman farmers of Tempsford found themselves embroiled in street fighting. When they were tried in the January of 1839 at the Assizes, the case drew much attention and lasted all day. The riot was sparked by a rumour that the church, for the first time in living memory, was to withhold support for the poor of the village. This particular form of support was to provide bread to the poor on Whit Sunday. The rumour circulating was that the church would no longer be providing this bread. The wealthy, as well as the poor of Tempsford, were outraged. The anger was directed towards the curate, John Coatsworth, but mostly towards the church wardens, who were accused of keeping the bread money for themselves. In truth, it was the archdeacon who had instructed that some of the poor bread fund be used for the church repairs that year. Fake news is not a new thing, and this piece of fake news or rumour led to the church wardens, John Ashwell and Henry Tingey, being abused in the street and at their homes. Tingey's evidence included this statement. Thomas Taylor said to me, Tingey, you are guilty. We shall bring you in guilty. Guilty. And he threw his arms about in an awful manner.
Shame on you!
Shame!
You're guilty!
Guilty!
Shame!
Guilty!
Mr. Browning spoke to Mr. Coatsworth, the effect of which made the mob shout and huzzah. After I saw the manner of the people towards us, I began to feel rather unpleasant. In danger, that is.
Guilty!
Guilty!
Get
Guilty.
after him!
Guilty! Grab it!
Get after him!
Grab it!
Get
He's
after
guilty!
him!
Some stones and dirt were thrown at us after the defendants had spoken, and on us attempting to get away. I was hurtled and pulled about by some people taking hold of my arms. Mr. Coles came to my assistance, and I got away over his fields and back away home. Though once home, the mob descend around his home, demanding answers. The curate Coatsworth convened a meeting at the schoolhouse the next day, where he planned to read the letter from the Archdeacon to those gathered. It seems some of the worst troublemakers had been asked to stay away, though. Coatsworth tells the court the following: "I was going to the school for the purpose of reading the Archdeacon's letter when John Browning called after me and said, 'You are a bad fellow, or you would not have acted so.' Taylor said, 'Why do you have private meetings? Why not have them at the church? You told mobs that we should not come to the school.' And then they used violent actions, and they said, 'You wish to wrong the poor.'" More agitation and worse violence than the day before broke out, and I am not certain whether the meeting at the schoolhouse ever went ahead. The 10 accused of a fray on the first day of violence were found not guilty. The 14 accused of the more serious charge pleaded guilty, and one of the wealthy farmers paid for their fines. Here's the list of the 14 accused of rioting. There was Thomas Taylor, landlord of the Wheatsheaf. Then we have the farmers John Allen, Cain Ashfield, and Thomas Mobbs. Then there is John Browning the Elder, who is described as a corn factor, and Joseph Addington, yeoman. We then have some labourers, Joseph Stokes, Jabez Orton, and Joseph Audley. And then some spinsters, Catherine Bennett, Mary Baldock, and Mary Stratton. And finally, Sarah, who was just described as the wife of William Medlock. So as you can see, it was a real mixed bunch between gentlemen farmers and your average labourer of the village. But crime associated with Tempsford wasn't restricted to just rioting or drunken bell ringing. The year after the riots, a William Meakin was found guilty of setting fire to a haystack in Tempsford and given the sentence of transportation for life. The same year, the Leicester Chronicle runs this story. "Sheep stealing has been very prevalent in the county of Bedford for some time past. A sheep was lately stolen from the farm at Tempsford, and the next morning the shepherd found the following affixed to the gate: 'Sir, your mutton's very good, and we're very poor. When we have eaten all this up, we'll then come and fetch some more.' This little rhyme appears in many urban and rural legends of the day, but it is true that Tempsford was associated with sheep rustling at the time. There is one case in the 1840s whilst the Elliots are residents of Tempsford where a poor man steals a sheep and butchers it on the spot. He is caught and bound over, but the newspaper reports that the magistrates express leniency because of his poverty and the size of his large family, which he needed to feed. Robert Elliott also successfully prosecutes at least 2 poachers for trespassing on his land with firearms. They are not caught with any game, but are fined just the same. So it's with this backdrop of rural violence, thievery, poaching and poverty that Lucinda Elliott finds herself Lady of the Manor at such a young age. The Bedfordshire archives certainly mention her youth and the fact that her husband was so frequently away as being possible causes for her experiences. She was also during the later period at Tempsford Hall pregnant or with a baby or infant. Both her mother and her mother-in-law also died during this period. Her mother was staying with her in 1846 at Tempsford. And if it was just Lucinda who experienced the haunting phenomena, I could agree that being so young in a strange house, feeling vulnerable, could lead to exaggerated fears and imagination. But it wasn't just Lucinda who experienced these strange sounds and noises. She has multiple witnesses to back her up, many of whom experienced the unexplained independently of her. Also, Lucinda's response to the phenomena is not that of a naive and frightened girl. Not at all. As we head to the adverts, just a reminder, you can get Weird in the Wade advert free in the UK by subscribing to BBC Sounds and everywhere else in the world by joining Weird in the Wade's Patreon. Just search Weird in the Wade Patreon or follow the link in the episode description to find out more about how you can get advert-free episodes. And for those of you listening to the ads, please remember that by listening to them, you're supporting the show. Thank you.
You may think you know McDonald's drinks, but you don't know them like this. From fruity refreshers like the Strawberry Watermelon Refresher and the mango pineapple refresher with popping boba, to crafted sodas like the Sprite Berry Blast with berry-flavored Sprite topped with cold foam. Who knew ice-cold drinks could be so fire? 6 all-new drinks are here. Try them all, now at McDonald's. Refreshers contain caffeine.
Experience a membership that backs what you're building with American Express Business Platinum. Unlock over $3,500 in business and travel value annually with statement credits on select purchases from brands like Dell, Hilton, and Adobe, and other benefits. American Express Business Platinum. There's nothing like it. Based on total potential value of statement credits on select purchases and other benefits, enrollments required, monthly and other limits and terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum.
Zootopia 2 has come home to Disney Plus.
Let's go!
Get ready for a new case.
We're gonna crack this case and prove we're the greatest partners of all time!
New friends.
You are... Gary the Snake. And your last name? The Snake.
Dream Team. New habitats.
Zootopia has a secret reptile population.
You can watch the record-breaking phenomenon at home.
You're clearly working at
Zootopia 2, now available on Disney Plus, rated PG.
What the butler saw. The butler, William Johnson, a Londoner who was between the ages of 32 and 38 whilst at Tempsford, provided the following statement to Mrs Elliott, which was written up in 1850.
Butler William Johnson. I am requested by Mrs Elliott to share in writing the annoyances I heard during the time I lived at Tempsford, which was so numerous I cannot recollect them all. But the following I am prepared to swear on oath. The first moment on my living at Tempsford, I slept in a room on the first landing facing the back stairs. One night, after I had been some time in my bed, I distinctly heard a groping on the panels of the bedroom door. I heard this more than once. On another occasion, when I slept on the top landing, my door was thrown open in the night. I was not asleep in annoyance of the toothache. I heard the handle of the door turn, and at another time, about midnight, I heard a violent blow on the door. It appeared to me as if it was struck with a heavy carpenter's mallet. On another occasion, when going through the rooms, after the family had retired for the night, to see if the doors and windows were properly fastened, going from the dining room to the great hall, there appeared something to rush from behind the door towards me and backing in an instant. I sprang to the door, and to my astonishment, no one was there. On several occasions, I have heard noises insofar as to the rolling of heavy shutters. One afternoon, I heard a loud scream. The footman met me at the pantry door and said, "Is it in the drawing room?" I rushed to the drawing room door, where I heard Mr Elliott and Colonel Thornton talking very quietly. When Mr and Mrs Elliott have been out to dinner or on an evening party, I have heard the carriage coming. I've lighted the lamps and I've heard it stop. But on opening the door, no carriage was to be seen.
William Johnson's testimony includes one of the most common occurrences reported at the Hall, that of doors being tampered with, knocked or banged, or being opened by themselves. His testimony also includes the incident of hearing the carriage arrive home when in fact it wasn't there. This is something which Sarah Baker, the lady's maid, also confirmed in her statement, as does the footman, Maythorne. This is a phenomenon we've discussed before in the episode about haunted cinemas, of all places. Remember the cinema worker who saw their colleague arrive at work, only to find them 20 minutes later arriving again? Their colleague was not playing a trick on them, and that led to the discussion with Danny Robbins about the Scandinavian Vardoga, a kind of mashup between déjà vu and doppelgangers, and my frequent experience of it audibly as a teenager. I'd often hear my mum's car pull into the garden on an evening only to discover that she wasn't there at all. Sometimes our little dog Cindy would react as if my mum's car was there as well. It wasn't just me. Obviously, there are psychological reasons why you might think you hear your employers, in the case of the servants, or your family returning home prematurely. You're expecting them, you're primed for their return. But when it happens, it does feel very odd indeed. Sarah Baker also mentioned in her statement hearing a large wagon which disturbed the drive at the front of the house. This is clearly not the sound of a horse carriage or cart. It's something much louder, which she can't explain. And then there's the scream Johnson the butler and Maythorne the footman hear. That is also interesting. It is possible, of course, that either Mr Elliott or Captain Thornton screamed out and then resumed their quiet conversation. But the butler and Maythorne are not the only people to hear screams and other upsetting sounds from inside the house. And these sounds seem to get worse when the family returns to Tempsford after a break in September 1846. And it's important to state here that many witnesses, including Lucinda, say that activity in the house would come in waves, with periods of peace and then weeks of disturbance. Lucinda reports that she and others heard a great many people conversing in loud tones, but we could not tell where those voices proceeded from. She doesn't specify any particular words or phrases, sadly. In the January of 1848, when Lucinda is unwell, she hears loud screams coming from the landing below her bedroom. Lucinda gets out of bed and steps out onto the landing to better hear where the screams are coming from. She says that as she approaches the banister, the screams stop, and then she hears a voice distinctly saying, "Hush, hush, hush." This repeating of the word hush is another of those sounds which seems to float away from Lucinda as she hears it. She rings a bell to inquire from a maid what is happening, but all has been quiet and still in the house. The servants were all at dinner until she summoned one of them. During June and July 1848, Lucinda reports hearing groans at night coming from the empty rooms below hers. These groans also seem to drift away from her as she investigates where they're coming from. But some of the Elliott's guests have also reported hearing strange groans and moans as early as 1844. A woman guest staying in the drab room. And just an aside here on the word drab. Drab was once a colour, the kind of brown-grey of a sparrow's wing. A colour probably quite fashionable now with those who like their beige and grey interiors, but it fell out of fashion in the 19th century and became associated with the poor who could only afford drab-coloured cloth. So today drab means something that's plain, dull, maybe a bit sad, but it was once a popular colour. Now, this guest in the drab room says that she hears heavy breathing as if a person is in pain, as well as groans. Now, this could be a case of a prim Victorian lady misunderstanding the sounds of a passionate couple in the room next door. And remember, we came across that in the Prestonville horror story. In 1848, the nurse who looks after Lucinda's baby daughter also reported hearing groans, as if someone was in pain, along with whispering. But she hears this actually in her own bedroom. The kitchen maid Louisa also hears groans of pain and coughs in her bedroom close to her ear. So I think we can rule out amorous couples when it comes to the nurse and Louisa's observations. Moving furniture. After hearing footsteps, the next most frequently reported unexplained activity in Tempsford Hall was the sounds of furniture or heavy items being moved, dragged, or even thrown about. We have the butler hearing barrels being thrown. Lucinda and her maid Sarah frequently hear items of furniture being moved, dragged, or smaller items being dropped or thrown when nothing has been disturbed. There are over 20 separate reports in the statement, ranging from vague noises with no apparent cause to some rather startlingly detailed accounts of sounds involving furniture. Early on in their stay at Tempsford Hall, Lucinda hears loud thumps from above her in the drawing room. These thumps are so loud that she says they make the chandelier above her head shake. On marching upstairs to confront the noisy or clumsy servant, she finds no one about. No one could have been up there once she has tracked down all of the servants. On another occasion, Lucinda reports hearing a large mirror being wrenched from the wall. She is convinced it has lurched forwards. She is sitting near it. This is a very specific sound, and she is afraid that the mirror will fall and break. When the butler is summoned, he finds the mirror perfectly fixed to the wall. Now, on this phenomena of moving furniture or sounds like moving furniture, the night I spent in the Golden Fleece pub in York, I woke in the middle of the night to hear sounds which I could only describe as being as if a heavy object was being dragged across the floor of the rooms below me, and this is the sound that I heard. No one was awake, and no one was moving furniture about, that's for sure. But that is what it sounded like. I know it was most likely the old building settling or an echo of some other deep noise from somewhere else, but it's such a common occurrence in hauntings, and particularly poltergeist cases. I really wonder if there isn't some kind of experiment that we could devise to see how people interpret naturally occurring but low frequency noises. Some of the other noises reported at Tempsford Hall were also startling in their detail and quite specific. One servant complains of hearing sweeping constantly when no one is cleaning. Another complains of hearing a fire being stoked and coals being shovelled onto the fire constantly. One of the oddest noises reported by both Mr and Mrs Elliott is when they are disturbed for over 30 minutes by the sound of a child's rattle. And this is before they have any children. They search and can find no source for this noise. Not just sounds. The disturbance at the house goes beyond noises. We have strange sensations reported by Mrs Elliott's first lady's maid, Esther, the one who refused to return to the hall in 1847. She complained to her mistress of feeling as if items were thrown onto her bed at night whilst she was asleep in bed. But possibly the activity which tipped Esther's fear into abject terror so that she would give up her job was when, in the summer of 1847, on 3 separate times in the same night, she felt an icy hand brush across her face. There was no one in the room with her. She was not alone in feeling this cold hand, it seems. Louisa, the maid, spoke of it, as did Lucinda herself, stating that one night, when the loud noises had woken her and Mr Elliott, her pillow rose from the bed, and beneath it she felt an icy hand. The groom Tompkins also explains that when he and his wife lived in Tempsford Hall alone, when the Elliots were away, his daughters had their sleep disturbed at least 2 or 3 times a week. His 3 girls slept in the kitchen, I am assuming for warmth, as the kitchen fire would always be lit. They all reported seeing furniture like chairs move around overnight. But one daughter was plagued by the sensation of cold hands touching her face. As well as these unsettling sensations, there are at least 4 apparitions which are seen. Lucinda Elliott describes seeing the first one on a Sunday afternoon. It's within the first few months of their time at Tempsford Hall, when her husband, their guests and servants were at church. She is unwell and staying at home. As she glances out of the window, she sees a very tall man, dressed as if he is in deep mourning, all in black. He's standing beneath the acacia tree, and he is gazing towards her rose garden. She is puzzled as to who this is, as everyone is at church. She does not recognise him. So she looks down at her watch to ascertain the time, and when after a couple of moments she looks back up, he is gone. The landscape is open apart from that one tree. She is convinced that he could not disappear in that couple of seconds it took her to see that the time was midday. No one else reports seeing such a man when they return from church. Lucinda's second sighting is later in their time at Tempsford, not long before they leave. She sees a white cloaked figure pass the window. She explains that she is quite nearsighted and did not have her glasses with her, so she could see very little detail. But she gets up and goes to investigate who it is, and again can find no one. The third apparition we have already met. Louisa, the kitchen maid, described that unusual figure at her bedside. At first shadowy, then as it moved away from her, it was illuminated brightly until it faded away. The final apparition reported was by William Maythorne, the footman, who is quoted directly as saying, "One night I was awoken by someone opening my bedroom door and walking into my room. They appeared to come to the washstand. I spoke to them 2 or 3 times but received no answer, and they appeared to glide away. I was determined to satisfy myself, and I got out of bed and followed their footsteps, but they appeared to die away. What kind of haunting is this? With the build-up of activity from vague sounds to more deliberate and identifiable noise, this case does have some of the hallmarks of poltergeist activity, but it doesn't quite meet all of the criteria. Apparitions are rarely linked with poltergeist cases, for example. There is one description, though, of one of the phenomenon experienced in the house that to me typifies a poltergeist. And this is what Lucinda describes occurring. It happened during the point that the annoyances were escalating in the summer of 1848. Lucinda describes her maid pulling back the curtains from around one side of her bed, only to hear the curtains being pulled back on the opposite side. Yet those curtains there had not been touched. Lucinda says that it was as if something was mimicking Sarah's actions. And it's this copying or mimicking which reminds me of other poltergeist cases. When in the summer of 1848 activity in the hall really ramps up, the family seek the assistance of a police officer. Before we look at Police Constable James Smith and his statement, I think it's important to consider how Lucinda approaches this haunting. At no point in her statement does she use the words haunting, ghost, or any other phrases you'd expect when discussing the paranormal at this time. When she describes the figures she sees, they are just that, figures. A very tall man in deep mourning, a figure in white cloak. Lucinda also, early on in the activity, directs her guests, her mother-in-law in the first instance, to make notes of when and where sounds or disturbances are experienced, so that they can compare them over breakfast. She realises that not everyone is experiencing the same phenomenon at the same time. In one case, she hears one type of noise, footsteps, whilst a guest at the same time hears something completely different, screams. Lucinda is deploying scientific and investigative techniques. With every detailed account of activity she describes, she also reports that she investigated, searching even at night for the source of the noise or disturbance. To her, this activity seems to rarely scare her, but instead she frequently describes it as annoying or disturbing her rest or peace, or just puzzling her. It is only in the summer of 48 when she says that the house becomes uncomfortable. The fact that she either commissions or agrees to the commission of a police officer in her house for several months shows that she was determined to detect exactly what was causing all the activity. And as I mentioned earlier, this is 2 decades before the Society of Psychical Research is set up. Spiritualism is still in its infancy in the US in 1848. It doesn't make an appearance in the UK until 1852. I wonder if that is an important consideration for us, though. How would this activity have been interpreted 20 or 30 years later at the height of the spiritualist movement's first wave? Would seances have been held in the hall? Either way, I am just so impressed with Lucinda's methodical, logical, and practical approach to working out what was going on in her home. I think she was ahead of her time. So instead of a séance, the Elliots employ the services of a local police constable, James Smith. He was a constable working out of Biggleswade and part of the newly formed Bedfordshire Rural Police Force. He appears in the newspapers a couple of times between the 1840s and 50s, providing evidence at court cases. He seems a sensible, competent and practical police officer. He is commissioned by the Elliots to spend nights at the hall to investigate these strange sounds and sights. Sadly, his statement is not a direct quote within the larger dossier of evidence, but his recollections are written up, just not in first person. We also have the recollections of Lucinda about the police constable's actions within the hall, so I've used them to create this statement based on P.C. Smith's statement and Lucinda's.
I am James Smith, Police Constable of Bedfordshire Rural Police. I was requested to stay overnight with Mr and Mrs Elliott at Tempsford Hall during the summer of 1848. For several months I spent my nights awake in the hall, patrolling and attempted to ascertain what was causing the disturbances reported. Over 4 years previously, unaccounted for annoyances and disturbances about the hall had bothered the family and their servants. On many occasions, it was suspected that intruders or thieves were behind the strange sounds, but no culprits had been seen, let alone captured. I started my task in the belief that either an outsider or possibly a wicked servant was behind the disturbances, but I could not prove either of these hypotheses. Instead, this is what I experienced. One night I was sitting in the passage at the top of the house when I heard a door unlock. It was a door I could see. There was no one outside the door, so the room was being unlocked from within. But no one opened the door, and there was no one in the room when I went to inspect. On other occasion, on the same passage, I heard heavy footsteps go across the room opposite, as if coming towards the door, and so towards me. I heard the door unlock, and this time the door opened. It seemed to drag along the carpet. I went to the open door. There was no one in the room, and no one had left it. On one night in early July, when I was new to my duties at the hall, I was sitting on the first floor landing in the middle of the front bedroom, and I heard someone sob very loudly 3 or 4 times. I took no particular notice, thinking this was Mr and Mrs Elliott's bedroom. I later ascertained that Mr and Mrs Elliott had forsaken that room and now slept on the floor above. There was no one in that bedroom when I heard the sobbing. I have also heard footsteps, both loud and distant, which I could not account for, as I knew I was the only one awake. On the Elliott's last night at the hall, although I experienced a quiet time, they did not. I spent some time sitting in the top passage and all was quiet. I then proceeded downstairs to spend 15 minutes by the fire in the kitchen, on account of it being a particularly cool September night. It was whilst I was in the kitchen that I heard the bell being rung by Mr Elliott. I went directly to the second floor to find out what he needed. I found Mr and Mrs Elliott in some distress. They'd been calling me, but I had not heard them call. Mrs Elliott had been first disturbed by hearing thunderous footsteps marching about the hall, which she described as making the whole house shake. I would have been sitting in the passage above when she heard these stamping steps, but I heard nothing. Mrs Elliott then thought she heard a great noise of items being dragged and moved about in her maid's room. On going to her maid, Sarah Baker, she found her fast asleep. She woke the girl, and the two then retired to Mrs Elliott's room when the loud stamping walk started again, shaking the house. Mr Elliott now heard these footsteps as well and was determined to call for me. But before he could go on to the landing, Mr and Mrs Elliott heard the sound of a desperate struggle at the top of the stairs, as if 2 men were fighting. It was only when all was still that Mr Elliott bellowed down to me. It is surprising that I did not hear this. It was then he rang the bell, and I came to them immediately. The family left Tempsford Hall the very next day and have never returned.
On this very last night that the Elliots stay at Tempsford, when Lucinda first wakes to hearing noises like boxes being moved, she assumes it is the butler and goes to him first, only to find all is quiet and that he is asleep. She never gives up on that initial assumption that something rational is causing the disturbances. She spends most of her time describing the sounds which could be explained rationally, the moving of furniture and footsteps, and then almost as an aside, she adds that on the last fateful night, she also heard a voice speak to her in her room. Nearby to her, it said, "It is time." She then recollects in the statement that she often heard both men and women speak close to her when she was in her room. These voices would often be, and I quote, imploring for help. I wonder if she glosses over these occurrences because they are much harder to explain rationally. When the Elliots leave the house permanently, it seems that they go on to live peaceful lives again, if for just a short time. Both Mr and Mrs Elliott die young, as does one of their daughters. But thanks to Lucinda's desire to document these unexplained events, we have the 27-page statement from her and her servants. My theory. I am sure there are many different theories that we could apply to this set of strange circumstances. A wicked servant terrorising the family, maybe. Some natural occurrences being misinterpreted, perhaps. Or a poltergeist haunting. But I want you to think about the sounds and the other phenomena that were reported. Many footsteps were often heard rushing hurriedly, being heard from all directions and all parts of the house. There was the sound of skirts swishing, reported often. And then the sounds of items being moved, dragged, transported around the house. And then we have the screams, groans, coughs, sighs and breathing of those in pain, along with words of either sympathy or maybe mild scolding. Hush, this is enough. Then there were the reports of the hall sounding like it was full of people, all talking. Where might you hear sounds like that? Now maybe I'm primed, and maybe I've primed you too by telling you that exactly 100 years after these noises were heard by the Elliots and their staff, the hall was commandeered and used as a hospital during World War II. We've come across this hospital before as well. It's the military hospital the survivors of the Potton Wood Liberator plane crash were taken to in September 1945. Could the Elliots and their servants and guests be experiencing some kind of time slip? A slip into the future rather than the past? I wonder if the loud ticking heard by Sarah Baker, the lady's maid, could be some piece of equipment used in a hospital. I wonder whether the large wagon that she heard could have been an ambulance. She would never have heard an engine before. It's just a thought, and I'll return to it in the next episode when we explore Tempsford's wartime history. Next time on Weird in the Wade, I'll also let you know the fate of Tempsford Hall before and after the Second World War. For such a small part of Bedfordshire, it has had a remarkable history. But before today's episode ends, I promised you some updates. Before I tell you about the latest unusual occurrence at the Golden Pheasant, I wanted to give you an update about the Road Ghost episode. Firstly, thank you to everyone who has sent me a road ghost sighting or story. I have read them all and I will reply to you as soon as I can. I will be making more road ghost episodes, whether it's about ancient hunting horns, elephants or phantom cavaliers on our country's roads or further afield. I'm particularly keen to hear from anyone else who has had a road ghost encounter between Sandy and Potton on the road which passes the RSPB Lodge north of Biggleswade. 2 people have been in touch about this stretch of road already, and I'd love to hear from anyone else. I do also want to make an episode about Fairfield, or the Three Counties Asylum, in more detail. And I just wanted to clear something up about the strange encounter Anne had after visiting the newly built Fairfield estate. Anne got back in touch with me to say that although her friend may have known about the history of Fairfield and its past as the Three Counties Asylum, she did not. Anne knew nothing about the hospital at all. Although I linked the visit there with the eerie mist which entered their car, other than the geography of it happening close by, Anne did not really link the two. She wasn't in any way primed to think that the area was creepy or spooky. It was just a new housing estate built around a beautiful old hospital building to her. Finally, the updates about the Golden Pheasant. After the paranormal sleepover episode, I have been contacted by more people who worked or drank at the Pheasant in the past and encountered strange or unusual activity there. Thank you to everyone who's been in touch. But even before that episode went out, a very strange thing happened to Chev, one of the bar staff at the Pheasant. It was about 1 week before the last episode was released. Chev was cleaning up for the night before going home. She was mopping the floor behind the bar, which leads into the kitchen area. After she'd mopped the floor and put the cleaning equipment away, she noticed that in front of the bin and next to the fridge, what can only be described as the outline of a foot, or at least something which very closely resembles the outline of a foot. This was on the freshly mopped floor. It was just 1 foot, and a small one at that, about 3/4 of the size of Chev's foot, child-sized. Now, I'm not saying a footprint because it actually looks more like someone drew around the outside of a foot rather than an actual print in the wet floor. If you head over to the Weird in the Wade blog, weirdinthewade.blog, or check us out on social media, and we're pretty much everywhere on social media, just search Weird in the Wade, you'll see 2 images of the outline of that foot. As I said, it appeared after she had mopped the floor, but on wiping the floor again, the mark did disappear quite easily. So it wasn't as if it was some stubborn, syrupy spillage, for example, which was what my first thought was. It is probably a case of pareidolia, a random shape resembling a foot. But it really is curious. A few people have said that it even looks like it has a cloven hoof at the front rather than 5 toes. And what with the gnomes, you know, the ones that we don't talk about at the Pheasant, could it be one of them wandering or hopping about barefooted in the pub, maybe? Do let me know what you think after you've had a look at the images. I do hope to bring you later in the year a more detailed update, including a new witness who worked at the pub, who I met on one of my Biggleswade ghost walks. Luke, the former barman, has a very scary tale to tell. Thank you for listening to Weird in the Wade. And thank you to all of the wonderful voice actors in this episode. Brian Bland, Emily L. Watts, Tess Savagear, Rhiannon Barrow, Steph Lay, Mikey Doyle, and Ollie Campbell. Weird in the Wade is researched, written, presented, and produced by me, Nat Doig. Theme music is by Tess Savagear.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
If you're enjoying the podcast you're listening to right now, and you've got a love of the paranormal, then I'm Rob Kirkup, and I think you might enjoy my show, How Haunted. Every other Friday, I take you to some of the most haunted locations across the UK, with the occasional trip overseas, as we explore the dark history behind each place, and the terrifying ghost stories said to haunt them. Across the year, there are seasonal specials too, including Christmas episodes packed with real listener ghost stories. And every October, the podcast goes weekly, a themed month building towards a big Halloween spooktacular. You'll also join me on real paranormal investigations, ghost hunts in seriously unsettling locations, with audio from the night so you can hear what happens as it happens. So if you're ready for creepy locations, grim history, and stories that follow you long after the lights go out, search How Haunted wherever you get your podcasts. And join me as together we ask, how haunted